The first week of training was designed to break cadets down and build them back up. And Megan understood quickly that everything in the Predator division was built around one simple idea. Raw, overwhelming power. The strength tests came first. And Megan watched in silence as Krethians lifted weights that would crush a human flat, as Valkorians tore through obstacles with claws that could shred metal, as Drogati warriors smashed training dummies into pieces with their massive fists when her turn came. She approached the testing station and wrapped her small hands around the weight bar, and she lifted with everything she had, managing to raise a weight that was roughly 1/10 of what the weakest Predator cadet had lifted. The instructors recorded her score without comment, but she could hear the snickering from the watching cadets, could feel their contempt like heat against her skin. Draxon stood at the front of the group with his arms crossed over his broad chest, and he shook his head slowly with a smile that showed too many teeth. Pathetic. He said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Even our children could lift more than that. Megan said nothing and moved to the next station, where she failed equally badly at the striking tests and the grappling exercises and every other measure of physical power that the instructors threw at Irby the end of the first day. Her scores were the lowest in the history of the Predator division, and Commander Varax called her into his office to give her one more chance to request that medical exemption. No one would blame you, he told her, and his voice was almost kind. You do not belong here, and staying will only bring you pain and humiliation. I will complete the evaluation cycle, Megan replied, and she kept her voice steady, even though every muscle in her body ached and her pride had been beaten down to almost nothing. The commander studied her for a long moment and then dismissed her with a wave of his clawed hand. Second day brought more of the same, and the third day was even worse. And by the end of the week, Megan had established herself as the weakest cadet to ever attempt a Predator division training program, but she noticed something that no one else seemed to see. Predator cadets were incredibly strong and fast and deadly. They were also incredibly wasteful with their energy, throwing maximum power in every task, regardless of whether it was necessary. They sprinted when they could have jogged, struck with full force when half would have been enough, and exhausted themselves on simple exercises that should have been easy. Megan stored this observation away and waited for an opportunity to use it. The opportunity came on the 8th day, when the instructors announced an endurance run through the station's outer ring. The track was 3 kilometers long, designed for short, explosive sprints that matched the hunting style of most predator species, and cadets were expected to complete it as fast as possible. But something went wrong with the system. A technical malfunction locked the track doors and forced the cadets to keep running, unable to stop until the engineers could override the safety protocols and let them out. The first hour passed and the Predator cadets maintained their brutal pace, their powerful legs carrying them around the track again and again with impressive speed. The second hour came, and Megan watched as the first cadets began to slow, their muscles burning through energy faster than their bodies could replace it. By the third hour, cadets were dropping out entirely, collapsing against the walls with heaving chests and trembling limbs, their bodies simply unable to continue. Megan kept running. She did not run fast, had never run fast compared to the others, but she ran steady, keeping a pace that her body could maintain indefinitely, a pace that felt almost comfortable compared to the desperate sprinting of the predators around her. The Krethians fell first, their massive bodies demanding too much fuel to sustain prolonged activity, and they sat gasping against the walls as Megan jogged past them again and again. The Rogati followed shortly after, their explosive power completely depleted after hours of running, and they watched with confused eyes as the small human continued her steady laps. Even the Valkyrians began to falter, their feline grace giving way to stumbling exhaustion, and Draxon himself was forced to stop and rest after the 4th hour, his golden fur matted with sweat and his chest heaving. Megan kept running when the engineers finally fixed the malfunction and opened the doors. Only 3 cadets were still on their feet. 2 Valkyrians who had learned to pace themselves, and 1 small human who looked tired but not broken. Megan finished the extended course in 3rd place. And the silence that followed was heavier than any insult could have been. Commander Varax stood on the observation deck above the track, and Megan could feel his eyes on her as she walked off the course. And when she looked up, she saw something in his expression that might have been surprise or might have been the beginning of respect. Draxon approached her in the recovery room, his pride clearly wounded and his amber eyes burning with something she could not quite read. "You cheated," he said, his voice low and dangerous. No prey species could outlast a Valkyrian in a test of endurance. "I did not cheat," Megan replied calmly. "I simply did not stop." He leaned closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "What are you?" he demanded before Megan could answer. A human voice spoke from the doorway. "She is exactly what she appears to be," said Lieutenant Sandra Webb, a human officer stationed at the academy who Megan had never met before. A human. The lieutenant crossed the room and placed herself between Megan and Draxon. And though she was smaller than the Valkyrian by nearly 2 feet, she did not seem afraid. "Walk with me, Cadet Cole," she said, and Megan followed her out of the recovery room and into a quiet corridor. "Do you know why you finished that race?" Lieutenant Webb asked once they were alone. Megan shook her head. "Humans are persistence predators," the lieutenant explained. "Our ancestors did not have claws or fangs or venom, so they developed a different hunting strategy, one that no other species in the galaxy seems to understand." She stopped walking and turned to face Megan directly. "They would chase their prey until it collapsed from exhaustion," she said. "Not for minutes or hours, but for days if necessary, because humans can regulate their body temperature through sweating, can carry water with them, can keep moving when every other creature has to stop and rest." Megan felt something shift inside her, a realization that changed everything she thought she knew about herself and her place in this academy. "The predators here are ambush hunters," Lieutenant Webb continued. "They evolved for quick kills and explosive power, not sustained pursuit. And that is why they could not finish the race. And that is why you could." "What does this mean?" Megan asked. The lieutenant smiled, and there was something fierce in that expression. "It means you might not just survive these 3 months," she said. "It means you might actually compete. And when the galaxy figures out what humans really are, everything is going to change." Megan returned to her barracks that night with new understanding burning in her chest. And when Draxon looked at her with those predatory eyes, she looked back without flinching. She was beginning to understand that being small did not mean being weak, and being prey was not the same as being helpless. Megan Cole stepped off the transport shuttle and took her first breath of recycled station air, feeling the weight of her single bag on her shoulder and the flutter of nervous excitement in her chest as she looked around at the massive docking bay of the Galactic Coalition Military Academy. She was 19 years old, barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, and she had traveled 3 weeks through deep space to be here, leaving behind everything she knew on Earth to become one of the few humans accepted into the most prestigious military training facility in the known galaxy. Humanity had only joined the Coalition 5 years ago, and most species still viewed humans as newcomers, as a minor race from a small blue planet on the outer edge of an unremarkable spiral arm. And Megan knew she would have to work twice as hard as anyone else just to be taken seriously. The docking bay was filled with beings from dozens of worlds, and Megan found herself staring despite her best efforts to appear calm and professional, because she had never seen so many alien species in one place before. Towering reptilian Crethians walked past her with heavy footsteps that shook the floor, their scaled bodies covered in natural armor that gleamed under the station lights, and their eyes tracked movement with the cold precision of born hunters. Feline Valkyrians moved through the crowd with liquid grace, their fur patterns ranging from deep black to spotted gold, and their retractable claws clicked against the metal floor as they walked, each one standing at least 7 feet tall with muscles that rippled beneath their coats. Megan clutched her registration tablet and made her way toward the orientation hall, weaving between massive bodies and trying not to bump into anyone, because she had read that some species took accidental contact as a challenge or insult. The orientation process took 3 hours, and Megan sat in a chair designed for someone twice her size, while a holographic display cycled through rules and regulations and schedules in 17 different languages. When the system asked her to confirm her class assignment, she pressed the acceptance button without really looking, because she was exhausted from the journey and the translation software had been glitching all morning, rendering some words in strange combinations that made little sense. She received her barracks assignment and her class schedule and her cadet uniform, and she followed the directions on her tablet through winding corridors until she reached the door marked with her division designation. The door slid open and Megan walked inside. And then she stopped, because something was very wrong. The room was filled with predators. Not just any predators, but the largest and most dangerous-looking beings she had ever seen, all of them turning to look at her with eyes designed for tracking prey across open plains and through dense forests. A massive Crethian stood at the front of the room, his scales a deep crimson color that marked him as a senior officer, and the insignia on his uniform identified him as Commander Varax, head of the Apex Predator Combat Division. Megan felt her blood turn cold as she realized what had happened. The translation glitch had not just garbled some words. It had placed her in the wrong class entirely, and instead of communications and diplomacy where she belonged, she had registered for the most elite and dangerous combat program in the entire Academy. Commander Varax stared at her for a long moment, his vertical pupils narrowing as he processed what he was seeing. And then he made a sound that Megan realized was laughter, a deep rumbling noise that came from somewhere in his massive chest. "Is this a joke?" he asked, his voice carrying easily across the silent room. And every predator in the class turned to watch the small human standing frozen in the doorway. Megan wanted to run, wanted to turn around and flee back to the administration office and demand they fix this terrible mistake. But her legs refused to move, and her voice caught in her throat. Commander Varax walked toward her, each step covering more ground than 3 of her own strides. And he stopped directly in front of her and looked down from his impressive height. "You are human," he said. And it was not a question but a statement of fact delivered with something between confusion and contempt. "Yes, sir," Megan managed to say, and she was proud that her voice did not shake even, though her hand certainly did. The commander checked his tablet, and his expression shifted from amusement to genuine puzzlement as he read her registration file. "Your paperwork is legitimate," he said slowly, as if he could not quite believe what he was seeing. "You are officially registered for the Apex Predator Combat Division, which is exclusively for species classified as apex predators on their homeworlds." There was a translation error, Megan explained quickly. "I was supposed to register for communications, but the system malfunctioned, and I did not realize the mistake until just now." Commander Varax made that rumbling sound again and shook his head. "You have 24 hours to file for a transfer," he told her. "I suggest you use that time wisely, because if you are still registered in my division tomorrow, I will treat you exactly like every other cadet. And I do not think you will survive the first week." Megan spent the next 24 hours trying everything she could think of to transfer out of the Predator Division. But the bureaucratic systems of the Coalition were not designed for speed or flexibility. A transfer request from the Apex Predator Combat Division required completing 1 full evaluation cycle, which took 3 months. And the only alternative was requesting a medical exemption that would result in immediate discharge from the academy, and a shuttle ride back to Earth. She sat in her temporary quarters and stared at the two options on her screen. And she thought about everything she had sacrificed to get here. All the years of training and studying and dreaming about the stars. She could not go home in disgrace. Could not face her family and tell them she had failed before she even started. And so she made a decision that would change everything. She would survive 3 months in the Predator Division. And then she would transfer to Communications, where she belonged. The next morning, she walked into the barracks assigned to Predator Division cadets, carrying her single bag and wearing her cadet uniform that hung slightly loose on her small frame. Every eye in the room turned to watch her, and the silence stretched out until a massive Valkorian stepped forward, his golden fur marked with black stripes and his amber eyes fixed on her with predatory focus. "Look what wandered in," he said, and his voice was smooth and dangerous like silk wrapped around a blade. "Little Prey has lost her way." The other cadets laughed, and Megan felt her face flush with heat. But she did not look away from the Valkorian who stood before her. "I am Cadet Megan Cole," she said clearly, "and I am assigned to this barracks for the next 3 months. The Valkorian leaned down until his face was level with hers, and she could smell the meat on his breath and see the sharp points of his teeth. "I am Draxon," he told her, "and I give you 1 week before you break." Little Prey. Megan held his gaze and said nothing, because she knew that anything she said would only make things worse. And she had learned long ago that sometimes silence was the strongest response. She walked past him to find her bunk, and she began unpacking her bag with hands that trembled only slightly. And she told herself that 3 months was not so long, that she could endure anything for 3 months. She did not know then that she would never leave the Predator Division, or that her accidental registration would change the way the entire galaxy viewed humanity. All she knew was that tomorrow the real training would begin, and she would have to find a way to survive. The second month of training shifted focus from physical conditioning to hunting simulations, and the cadets were transported to a wilderness planet where they would be tested in environments designed to challenge even the deadliest predators in the galaxy. Megan stood at the edge of a dense forest, her simulation gear strapped to her body, and a tracking device in her hand that would locate the target drones scattered throughout the wilderness. The rules were simple: find the targets, neutralize them, and return to base before the time limit expired. The Predator cadets launched into the forest like missiles, their powerful legs carrying them through the underbrush at incredible speeds, their enhanced senses picking up traces that Megan could never hope to detect. She watched them go, and then she did something that confused her instructors completely. She sat down and waited for the first hour. She studied the forest, watching the patterns of light through the canopy, listening to the sounds of the alien ecosystem, mapping the terrain in her mind until she understood how everything connected. Then she began to move, not in a straight line toward her targets, but in a careful spiral that covered ground slowly and left almost no trace of her passage. She found her first target drone hiding in a cave system, and instead of charging in like the predators would have done, she blocked the exits with fallen branches and debris, trapping the drone inside where she could neutralize it safely. Her second target was perched in a tree, and she spent 2 hours climbing through the branches from a direction the drone's sensors were not designed to monitor, approaching from behind and above until she was close enough to disable it with a single precise strike. The Predator cadets finished their simulations quickly, their raw speed and power allowing them to hunt down targets in a fraction of the time Megan required. And they returned to base with satisfied expressions and competitive times. But when the scores were calculated, something unexpected happened. Megan's efficiency rating was the highest in the class. She had used less energy, made fewer detectable movements, left almost no trail, and neutralized all her targets without ever putting herself at risk. The Instructors had been tracking everything: energy expenditure, noise levels, visibility, collateral damage, and a dozen other factors that the Predator cadets had never considered. "You hunted like prey," one of the instructors said. And his tone made it clear this was not a compliment. "I hunted like a human." Megan replied. Commander Varax summoned her to his office that evening. And when she entered, she found him standing at his window, looking out at the stars with an expression she could not read. "When humans joined the coalition," he began without turning around, "we classified your species based on standard criteria, examining your physical attributes, your natural weapons, your position in your planet's food chain." He turned to face her, and his reptilian eyes were thoughtful rather than hostile. "We concluded that humans were a prey species," he continued. "Soft bodies, no claws, no venom, no armor. Small and weak, compared to nearly every other intelligent species we had encountered." "I understand, sir," Megan said. "No," the commander replied. "I do not think you do, because I am beginning to believe we made a critical error in that classification, one that has blinded us to what humans truly are." He walked closer to her, and for the first time since she arrived at the academy, he did not seem to be looking down at her with contempt. "You do not hunt like prey," he said. "You hunt like something much more dangerous, something patient and calculating and relentless. And I think perhaps the galaxy has underestimated your species." Megan did not know how to respond, so she simply stood at attention and waited. The commander dismissed her with a nod, and she returned to the barracks to find Draxon waiting for her. "The others say you set a record today," he said, and his voice was different now, harder and more aggressive than before. "They say the little human out-hunted the Predators. I just completed my assignment," Megan replied carefully. "You made us look foolish," Draxon growled, "and I will not allow that to stand. So, I am challenging you to a sparring match tomorrow in front of the entire class, and we will see how your clever tricks hold up against a real predator." The challenge was public and official, which meant Megan could not refuse without losing all the respect she had earned. She accepted with a single nod, and Draxon smiled with all his teeth showing before walking away. The sparring match took place in the main training arena, with the entire Predator division watching from the elevated seats, and Commander Varax himself serving as referee. Draxon stood across from her, his massive frame relaxed and confident, his claws extended just enough to remind everyone what he was capable of. Megan raised her fists in a basic fighting stance and waited. The bell rang, and Draxon attacked immediately, crossing the distance between them in a single explosive leap, his claws slashing through the air where her head had been a moment before. Megan dove to the side and rolled, coming up in a crouch as Draxon spun to face her. He was faster than she had expected, faster than anything she had ever faced, and his second attack caught her across the shoulder, leaving 3 shallow cuts that burned like fire. She stumbled back and he pressed his advantage, raining down blows that she could barely deflect, each impact sending shockwaves through her arms and threatening to knock her off her feet. The watching cadets roared their approval as Draxon dominated the fight, and Megan could taste blood in her mouth from where she had bitten her tongue, but she did not fall, and she did not give up. And as the fight continued, something began to change. Draxon attacked with patterns she realized, combinations that he had practiced so many times they had become instinct, and once she recognized those patterns, she could predict what was coming next. She started dodging before he even moved, slipping aside from attacks that should have been impossible to avoid, and her counterattacks began landing more often, quick strikes to vulnerable points that made Draxon grunt with surprise. The fight stretched on past 5 minutes, past 10, past the point where any normal sparring match would have ended, and the crowd grew quiet as they watched the impossible unfold. Megan was bleeding from a dozen small wounds, her body screaming with exhaustion and pain. But she was still standing, still fighting, still adapting to everything Draxon threw at her when the timer finally rang to signal the end of the match. Both fighters were still on their feet. The official result was a draw. But everyone watching knew what they had witnessed. No one had ever lasted that long against Draxon, the top cadet in the Predator division. The warrior who had never lost a sparring match in his entire time at the academy. He approached her afterward, his fur matted with sweat and his amber eyes studying her with something new in their depths. "What are you?" he asked again, and this time the question was not angry, but genuinely curious. "I am human," Megan replied. "And we do not know how to quit." Draxon made a sound that might have been a laugh and extended his hand in the human gesture of respect that he must have learned from. Somewhere Megan took it. And in that moment, something shifted between them, transforming from hostility into something that might eventually become respect. The third month of training focused on tactical command and squad coordination. And this was where the fundamental differences between humans and other predator species became impossible to ignore. Most predator species evolved as solitary hunters, developing incredible individual capabilities, but struggling to work together in groups. Their instincts constantly pushing them toward competition rather than cooperation. Megan watched the first command exercises with growing understanding as squads of predator cadets fell apart under pressure, each member trying to take control, each one prioritizing their own glory over the success of the team. Krethians refused to take orders from Valkorians, who in turn dismissed the tactical suggestions of Drogati warriors. And the result was chaos that the instructors recorded with expressions of tired familiarity. Every year the same problems? One instructor muttered as another squad dissolved into arguments. They cannot overcome their instincts. When Megan was assigned her first squad, she expected similar difficulties. But something strange happened instead. She gave an order, and her squad followed it, not because she was strong enough to enforce her commands, not because they feared her, but because her orders made sense and her squad recognized that following them gave everyone the best chance of success. Humans had evolved as social hunters. She remembered Lieutenant Webb explaining, not as individuals competing for kills, but as coordinated groups that worked together to bring down prey much larger and stronger than themselves. This instinct for cooperation was so deeply embedded in human psychology that Megan did not even think about it consciously. She simply organized her squad in the way that felt natural, assigning roles based on individual strengths, communicating constantly, adjusting strategies in real time as situations changed. Her squad won their first war game by a significant margin. They won their second and third games as well. And by the end of the first week, other cadets were requesting assignment to Megan's teams. Draxon approached her one evening in the common area, sitting down across from her with a heaviness that suggested something was weighing on his mind. "I need your help," he said. And the words seemed to cost him something. Megan waited for him to continue. "My people have always hunted alone," he explained. "Even when we form groups, we do not truly coordinate. We simply hunt in the same area and try not to interfere with each other. And I am beginning to see that this is a weakness." He looked at her with those amber eyes that had once seemed so threatening. "Teach me," he said. "Teach me how humans work together." Megan considered his request and realized that helping him would benefit her as well, because a stronger squad meant better chances in the final evaluation that was approaching. "Coordination requires trust," she began. "You have to believe that your squad mates will do their jobs, even when you cannot see them, even when your instincts are screaming at you to take control." "How do you build such trust?" Draxon asked. "By proving it," Megan replied. "By showing up when you say you will. By covering weaknesses instead of exploiting them. By celebrating victories together instead of fighting over credit." Their training sessions became a regular occurrence, and soon other cadets joined in. curious about the strange human techniques that were producing such impressive results. Lieutenant Webb found Megan in the mess hall one morning and sat down beside her with news that made her heart beat faster. Several coalition species have formally requested that humans be reclassified, the lieutenant said quietly. No longer as a prey species, but as apex predators. And your performance is being used as primary evidence to support the request. Megan stared at her in shock. Everything you do here is being watched. Lieutenant Webb continued. Not just by the Academy, but by representatives from dozens of worlds who are trying to understand what humans really are. And what you have shown them is changing everything they thought they knew. The weight of this revelation settled on Megan's shoulders like a physical burden, and she realized that she was no longer just fighting for herself, but representing her entire species to a galaxy that had dismissed humanity as insignificant. Commander Vorax called a meeting of all Predator Division cadets to announce the final evaluation. You will face the most advanced tactical AI in the coalition, he explained, his voice echoing through the assembly hall. An enemy that learns and adapts, that counters every strategy, that has never been defeated by any cadet team in the history of this academy. He paused to let the gravity of his words sink in. The highest score ever achieved was 60% of objectives, he continued. And that team contained 3 cadets who went on to become admirals. So do not expect to match their performance. Simply do your best and learn from the experience. Then he announced the squad assignments. And Megan felt every eye in the room turn toward her as her name was called. Cadet Cole will lead the primary assault team, Commander Vorax said. And there was no hint of humor in his voice. Her squad will consist of Cadet Draxon, Cadet Vorath, Cadet Cressix, and Cadet Morgan, a Valkorian, 2 Krethians, and a Drogati, all of them larger and stronger and more experienced than her. And all of them accepting her command without protest. Megan stood and faced her new squad, meeting each of their eyes in turn. We train tomorrow at dawn, she said. And we train every day until the evaluation. Because I do not intend to just participate in this test. I intend for us to win. Draxon smiled, showing his teeth in what she now recognized as approval rather than threat. The little human has grown bold, he said. And the other cadets laughed, but it was warm laughter. The kind shared between teammates who respected each other. They trained harder than any squad had ever trained, pushing themselves to exhaustion and then pushing further, learning each other's strengths and weaknesses, building the kind of trust that Megan had described. She designed strategies that used the Predator's natural abilities in ways they had never considered, sending Draxon as a scout because his senses were sharpest, positioning the Krethians at choke points where their armor made them nearly invincible, keeping the Drogati in reserve as a devastating counterattack force the night before the evaluation. Lieutenant Webb found Megan standing alone on the observation deck, looking out at the stars. Nervous? The lieutenant asked, terrified. Megan admitted, but also ready. More ready than I have ever been for anything in my life. Lieutenant Webb stood beside her in comfortable silence for a moment. Whatever happens tomorrow, she said finally, you have already changed everything because you have shown the galaxy that humans are not what they assumed. And that knowledge cannot be taken back. Megan nodded and continued watching the stars, knowing that tomorrow would determine not just her future, but possibly the future of her entire species. The final evaluation began at dawn, with Megan's squad transported to a massive simulation complex that spanned multiple environments and contained thousands of enemy units, controlled by the most sophisticated tactical AI in the coalition. The objectives were scattered across hostile terrain, each one guarded by forces that would test every skill the cadets had developed during their 3 months of training. Megan studied the tactical display one final time, memorizing the positions of her squad mates and the locations of their primary targets. "Remember what we trained for," she said through the communication link. "Trust each other, follow the plan, and adapt when necessary." "We are ready," Draxon replied, and the others echoed his confidence. The simulation began, and enemy units immediately began converging on their position, the AI having predicted standard assault patterns and prepared countermeasures accordingly. Megan's first order surprised everyone watching from the observation room. "Fall back to defensive position Alpha," she commanded. "Let them come to us." Her squad obeyed without hesitation, retreating to a fortified position that they had identified during their planning sessions. A narrow canyon where the enemy's numerical advantage would be neutralized, the A forces pursued, confident in their overwhelming numbers, and found themselves funneled into a killing zone where Varth and Kresix, the 2 Krethians, held the only entrance with their armored bodies, while Draxon and Morgan struck from elevated positions. The first wave of enemies was destroyed in minutes, but the AI learned quickly and adjusted its tactics. The second wave came from multiple directions, using aerial units to bypass the canyon defenses, and casualties began mounting on Megan's tactical display. She made another unconventional decision. "Abandon position Alpha," she ordered. "We are not here to hold ground. We are here to complete objectives. So move toward Target 1 and ignore the enemies behind us." Her squad broke from the defensive position and sprinted toward the first objective, leaving confused AI forces behind as they refused to engage in the prolonged battle. The enemy had expected they reached the first objective and secured it in record time, then moved immediately to the second without pausing to celebrate. Though I recalculated and began concentrating forces ahead of them, building defensive lines designed to stop their advance. "They expect us to push through," Megan said to her squad. "Like predators charging prey. What do we do instead?" Draxon asked. "We go around," she replied. "The long way, through terrain they have calculated as impassable." The route she chose was brutal, requiring them to climb sheer cliffs and cross toxic swamps and navigate through underground tunnels that barely fit the massive frames of her alien squadmates, but they emerged behind enemy lines, in positions the AI had not defended because no previous cadet team had ever attempted such an approach. They secured the second and third objectives before the AI could respond, and the observation room erupted in shocked murmurs as Megan's squad surpassed the 50% mark that most teams never reached, but the AI was learning, adapting, concentrating all remaining forces around the final objectives with a density of firepower that seemed impossible to penetrate. Megan called her squad together for a quick assessment. "We have 2 objectives remaining," she said, "and they want us to attack head-on because that is what predators do. But we are not going to give them what they expect." She outlined her plan, and even Draxon, who had grown accustomed to her unorthodox strategies, looked uncertain. "You want us to retreat?" he asked. "When we are so close to victory?" "I want us to make them think we are retreating," Megan clarified, "to break their prediction models and force them to overextend." It was the most dangerous gamble of the entire evaluation, and it required her squad to trust her completely. To ignore every instinct screaming at them to attack, they retreated, and the AI forces pursued, interpreting the withdrawal as a sign of weakness and moving out of their defensive positions to finish off the fleeing cadets. That was when Megan sprung the trap. "Now," she said calmly through the communication link, her squad reverse direction in perfect coordination, crashing into the pursuing forces with devastating precision. Draxon's claws and Morgan's fists and the Krethians' armored charges combining into a wave of destruction that scattered the enemy. Formation, they pushed through the chaos and reached the final two objectives simultaneously. Securing them before the AI could reorganize its defenses, the simulation ended with a score that made Commander Vorax stand in stunned silence and 84% of objectives completed. The highest score in Academy history, achieved by a team led by a human who had never been meant to be in the Predator Division at all. The graduation ceremony was held 3 days later, with representatives from dozens of Coalition species in attendance. Commander Vorax stood at the podium and called Megan forward, and she walked through the assembly hall feeling the weight of countless eyes upon her. When Cadet Cole arrived at this academy, the commander began. I told her she had 24 hours to transfer out of my division, because I believed she did not belong here, because I believed she was prey in a class designed for predators. He paused and looked directly at her. I was wrong, he said, and I have rarely been more pleased to admit an error. He announced that Megan had been offered a permanent position in the Predator Division as a tactical specialist, the first human ever granted such an honor. Then he shared news that made the entire assembly fall silent. Galactic Coalition had formally reclassified humanity as an apex predator species, with a special notation in the official records: persistence hunters demonstrating exceptional endurance, adaptability, and coordinated pack tactics. Threat levels significantly higher than physical profile suggests. The ceremony ended, and Megan's squad mates surrounded her, congratulating her with back slaps and shoulder grips and the various gestures of respect that each species U.S. Adraxan approached last. And he spoke a word in his native Valkorian tongue that she did not recognize. It means Pack Alpha, he explained. The leader who guides the hunt and brings the pack to victory. And it is the highest honor my people can give to a warrior. Megan accepted the title with a bow of her head. Lieutenant Webb found her afterward, standing alone on the observation deck where they had spoken so many times before. You know, the lieutenant said, the transfer paperwork finally came through last week. You could have left the Predator Division and joined communications like you originally planned. Megan smiled and shook her head. I know, she replied, but I think I ended up exactly where I was meant to be. She looked out at the stars, at the vast galaxy that had underestimated her species, and she knew that everything was about to change. Humanity had finally shown the galaxy what it truly was. Not prey hiding from predators, but something far more dangerous. Hunters who never stopped, who never quit, who would chase their goals across any distance and through any obstacle until victory was achieved. And Megan Cole, the small human who had joined the wrong class by accident, had led the way.